Well, hello, Ben. Paul, lovely to have you here today. Just to introduce our guests, we have Ben Chaplin, a Managing Director of Croner-i and Business and Accountancy Daily, and Paul Robbins, our Associate Director of Tax. So we're here today to discuss our predictions for the budget. We're obviously in a fairly interesting times, and we can't give you any specific detail, but we just wanted to discuss around some of the implications for business and accountancy firms. So perhaps I could start with you, Paul, just in terms of the budget. What are you expecting to see? We have some announcements already made, but some key areas to look at.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I mean, I think the main issue in a sense is I think everyone's craving a bit of certainty. It was a long time since the election, and there's still a few weeks to go, as we know. So it would be nice to actually know what's going on. I think that's a generally held view. I think the government in its early days did its best to suggest things were going to be tough. Lots of references to bad news, pain, short-term pain for long-term gain and the like. And so I'm sure tax rises are going to happen, and we'll go and talk about some of the areas they may fall. But I also think there may be some, a new chancellor, and particularly a new chancellor with a new party in government, I think is likely to want to make a bit of a splash and shake things up a bit. So I wouldn't be surprised if there were quite a few simplification measures dotted in around the tax raising ones.
Interesting. And I guess there's a big push on growth, Ben, so that has been very much the Labour philosophy to drive growth. So we do need to see some more positivity in the economy, as I think consumer confidence has really been battered, if you like, by some of the messaging.
It's an interesting balance there, though, isn't there? Because there's all this talk around investment and driving growth, which is great to hear. How we're going to fund it is a different question. Let's not get into that. But then there's all the tax raids, if you like, and uncertainty, as Paul was saying, that I think is undermining consumer confidence a bit at the minute. You're reading a lot about it. People are putting off making decisions and commitments because of the uncertainty about what's going to happen in a few weeks' time. And that consumer confidence ultimately feeds business. So although business is not so much on the radar in terms of the tax changes as much, we don't think, the impact of the individuals is underpinning the consumer. If the consumer confidence comes down, that stops people spending, which ultimately impacts business in some shape or form. It always will ricochet through.
Right. I mean, there's obviously been a few announcements so far. I was kind of interested in what they're looking at with private equity. Then we've got non-DOMs, the VAT on school fees, and all those issues are effectively raising fairly small amounts of money. So are there any, in terms of sort of this approach, by ruling out the big three taxes, income tax, VAT and national insurance contributions for workers, do you feel that the Chancellor's hamstrung themselves to a degree and we're going to see a lot of minor changes?
I think you're right, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the things that have been announced, like the furnished holiday lettings and the other ones you mentioned, are a little bit headline grabbing. They have a sort of slightly strong political undertow to them, so tackling non-DOMs, VAT on school fees, obviously. And I think what's come out on some of these is when people are starting, as always happens, to work out the actual how some of these are going to be implemented. It's not as straightforward as maybe some people thought. So they've dealt, a lot of those have already been announced. We know they're going to be in the next finance bill. There may be some changes in the budget. But yeah, you're right. They've closed off some big areas. Though it's interesting, they haven't revisited the freezing of thresholds. So, the whole fiscal drag thing will carry on being an issue. Affecting a lot of those, working people, if you like.
Right. And in terms of businesses, we don't seem to have seen a lot of rumour or talk about any major changes for business. We have a commitment to the 25% corporation tax.
That's right, for the full 5 years of the Parliament, yeah.
That's right. So, and no other mention really of other reliefs or actual incentives for business to invest as yet? Or?
No, just a promise and I think there is going to be a roadmap published as part of the budget, but a promise in the pre-election run-up to retain the full expensing and to retain the annual investment allowance for small businesses. So, but as you say, just confirming what's already there, nothing new. Whether they do something about business rates, again, a lot of people seem to think that's a possibility.
Mm-hmm. And Ben, as a business leader, what are your sort of thoughts about the business tax potential changes, or any concerns, if you like?
I think we're more concerned at the minute about the changes in employment law and employment rights. I think that's the big one for businesses to get their heads around. And I was actually talking this morning, when I was making a cup of tea this morning, with some of the guys on our HR Inform advice line, and I said, are you starting to get any much traction on some of the changes that are coming through? And they said, yeah, loads. Again, it's all about uncertainty. That's the theme that runs through. Nobody likes uncertainty. So, but I think we're going to get some clarification on those this week. But in terms of the budget, no, I don't think there's any particular concerns from a business point of view at this stage, because I don't. There's no rumours come out. It's always leaked, isn't it, to a certain extent. But I think the hope is things like you say, Paul, the writing down allowances, things like R&D and these incentives, which are trying to drive businesses to invest and grow, which seems to be one of the key themes. Yeah. You would assume those are going to stay, and you wouldn't want to put anything punitive on businesses if you want businesses to invest and grow and contribute towards the economy. Yeah,
makes absolute sense. And maybe turning to individuals, Paul. Mm-hmm. Sort of quite a vast area, but perhaps if we take a look at pensions first, mm-hmm. as that is a major issue which affects everybody really who's working, particularly with the changes to pensions over the last 15 years. So how do you see the risks to individuals in terms of potential changes to contributions, taxation?
Yeah, well, I had a canvassed opinion amongst the team of writers here in terms of what they thought might happen in terms of pension changes. I think the general feeling is that whilst initially it looked like almost a banker that relief would be capped at 20% on pension contributions, the rumour seems now to be that may not happen immediately, if at all. Another rumour that I only picked up this morning from a colleague is that potentially there'll be a special rate of NIC chargeable on employer pension contributions, which I'm not quite sure where that came from, but it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. There's also talk in the inheritance tax world of including residual pension funds in a person's estate for inheritance tax purposes, which currently doesn't happen. So yeah, again, it seems a bit bitty and a bit hard to pin down, but clearly, anything that changes pensions has quite wide-ranging implications for the whole economy.
I mean, it's quite complex, though. Yeah. So we're talking about simplification. So I always think of pensions as sort of like your tax is deferred, really. So you get tax relief when it goes in, but you get tax when it comes out. And then you've got to put into the mix that you can draw down some of it tax-free. But then if you're not going to get your tax relief when it comes in, you've got to work out, well, what tax rate am I likely to be paying when it comes out? It's quite a complex calculation. You think, well, is it worth then putting it in the pension, or are you better off not putting it in your pension? And you've got to remember, pensions hold investments in some of our largest FTSE businesses that again drives the economy. So it's quite complicated, isn't it? When we try and talk about simplification, I thought it was quite, it'd be a head scratcher. So we'll wait and see what comes out. But I think there'll be people reaching to do some quite complex calculations to see, is it what do I do? Do I contribute? Do I stop? Do I do something else? Sure. I think it will be quite complicated.
I was reading as well about the potential of reviewing salary sacrifice, because obviously quite a number of people in bigger businesses use salary sacrifice for their pension contributions, which is another sort of major issue, because that would again not only hit the employee but also businesses, because then their NICs would increase.
Well, that perhaps comes back to the rumour we heard about this potential NI on pension. there may be something there where they try and close that loophole for businesses, because a business that doesn't operate salary sacrifice still makes those NI contributions.
Exactly. No, complicated times. And just finally on the non-DOMS tax, I mean, obviously it's viewed as sort of a major tax gain potential, but obviously this type of taxpayer is very mobile and can leave the country, probably has various homes around the world and can easily relocate. Other countries are offering quite attractive non-DOM regimes in Europe. So there's some talk about a exit tax for non-DOMs. I wondered what your sort of impressions on that is, which was capital gains tax on assets when they depart the country quickly, if you like.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it's all possible, and I think you've identified exactly one of the issues that I was flagging up in terms of saying that some of these things that seemed great when you were talking about them against an election backdrop, when you actually have to come and implement them, are not nearly as straightforward and have some very big ramifications. I think it was said this morning some very large number of for income tax that was raised from I can't remember the top 15 wealthiest people in the UK, and if any one of those was to relocate to avoid tax, then there would be a big chunk of money missing. So I imagine things like that will be being looked at. Yeah.
And the inheritance tax implications for non-DOMs, which obviously wasn't part of the previous Conservative government non-DOM reform plans.
I think they had thought about it, and again, it's so hard to know, what they would have done if they'd actually, what they were prepared to admit to before an election, what they might have done after an election. So yeah, but it's definitely an area that we need to keep a close eye on. Yeah.
And I guess the other way for the government to raise money in view of the three big taxes being protected is to perhaps look at the thresholds. So for, say, additional rate earners, where they can maybe argue that they're not the workers that they're targeting and protecting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So in a sense, fiscal drag could get worse. That's very much a part. It's definitely not ruled out. Quite apart from trying to deal with it, it may well be extended.
Which has probably been exacerbated over the last 12 months with record inflation. I mean, look at the pay rises that have been awarded by the government themselves, to bodies, and then pressure on businesses to increase wages. The thresholds haven't moved, so it's going to push a lot of people up into those higher thresholds.
Yeah, it's certainly a risk, isn't it? And in terms of just other issues, we were looking at the impact of raising fuel duty. There's a temporary additional 10 pence reduction until next April, which I'm not sure if you're aware of, but had been announced as an anti-inflation measure. So just increasing the fuel levy by 10p would raise about £8 billion in a year. Wow. So you kind of wonder why that's not a slam dunk, that would be a real easy measure, especially as petrol prices have come down recently, albeit we're in a difficult sort of global climate at the moment. Yeah,
I guess no chancellor wants to be the first one to reintroduce something like that, but you're right. There are a lot of reasons for doing it. Even leaving aside sort of environmental type reasons too.
I was going to say, in terms of the green commitments, it would be a message, wouldn't it, in terms of moving on that.
And they may well do things on similarly around car benefit and stuff for non-electric cars as well, which would sort of tick most of the same boxes to some extent.
Yeah, because you're getting big tax breaks on your electric car benefit at the minute. Whether that stays or not, I don't know. But at the minute, very, very nice tax breaks
My hunch is
on
it
electric
will,
cars.
because
I
it's
think
sort
so.
of on-message.
Yeah.
But that they may well then get really tough on non-electric cars. Yeah.
Well, brilliant. I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Any final thoughts?
No, I mean, we haven't touched much on capital gains tax and inheritance tax, and I think that's sensible because, to be honest, there's so much being talked about as possible there that trying to pin down any one particular thing. But I think it was probably worth saying that CGT rates likely to go up. And my colleagues in the VIP team are definitely noticing more people, a lot of accountants and their clients wanting to trigger capital gains tax early so that they hopefully fall within the current regime rather than whatever regime is in place after the budget. And similarly on inheritance tax, I think everyone feels that something will happen on business property relief and agricultural property relief, but quite what that will be, other than it's likely to make it either less valuable or more hard to get, we don't know yet.
I think you're right, Paul. I don't think we'll see anything on the headline rates of income tax, particularly corporation tax, VAT. I don't think they're going to mess around with those. I think what we've got to look for is I think IHT definitely, I think pensions definitely, and then having a good look at the rules and the reliefs around some of these things, like domicile, a lot of the reliefs, business release, capital gains tax relief, all these sort of things, business property, etc. I think that's the bit where we're going to have to study for. So I think you're right. I think we'll be busy in our consultancy team in the beginning of November while we unravel what's there and what people do. Because what happens is when rules change, business and people will react to it and structure their affairs, to the best they possibly can. So yeah, I think we'll be busy.
And obviously on capital gains tax, there is a return to the 28% for buy-to-let and landlords, which was a temporary relief brought in the last budget, just for a short period. So I mean, that's an immediate one to watch out for, and you imagine that it will give them the opportunity to look at other rates.
I think it's an area they'll look at. Sorry, you might. I mean, there's a housing shortage, So I think second homes, all that sort of thing is going to come under some scrutiny as well. I
think one of the, again, maybe we haven't talked much about simplification, but I think one of the areas that possibly might happen on simplification is around the nil rate bands for inheritance tax. You currently get a sort of normal nil rate band and a residential nil rate band. I wouldn't be totally surprised if they got rid of the second, even if that just meant they added it to the first. But it just is arguably an unnecessarily complicated approach at the moment.
It sort of limits the benefits of the break, doesn't it? For single people don't obviously benefit from that residential nil rate band because of the way it's structured. And just finally, HMRC, we've had probably 2 years of very poor service levels. We've been noticing some of the tribunal decisions coming out recently quite often cite mistakes made by HMRC officials when they're advising on the right steps to take and the action. I wonder what your thoughts are on the sort of needs for investment, improvement in the service levels. Obviously they've got a new chief executive will be appointed to take up the post in the spring of 25, so I think that's a concern for businesses as well as individual taxpayers.
100%. You talk to any tax advisor at the moment, and that'll be near the top of their list. I think the CIOT wrote the president of the CIOT wrote a very good letter in the build-up to the election, setting out very clearly some of the issues and coming up with some good suggestions in terms of how those might be dealt with. Certainly the government have committed to spending a lot of money on closing the tax gap and dealing with avoidance and evasion. Don't want to sound unduly cynical, but we have heard that before. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, it's a good point. You're looking at putting taxes up and raising more money and playing with reliefs and playing with thresholds. What about this massive gap where it's not being paid, which should have been paid? What do we get? What are they going to do about that? Are we going to get some more inspectors in to do more tax inquiries and drive better compliance?
I think the general feeling is though that you can't create those sort of people overnight, and they've got rid of a lot of experienced people, and it will take a while, even with a lot, whatever resources are thrown at it to build up that expertise.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for your time, Ben, Paul. It's been great to hear your thoughts, and we'll be running a webinar on the Thursday the 31st, straight after the budget, so make sure you sign up for that, 2 p.m. on Thursday, where we'll have our experts covering all the different major tax changes that you need to know about for your business and your personal tax situation. So we'll be sending you details about that, and look forward to seeing you again soon on our post-budget ADTV. I'm sure we'll put a session together for you shortly after the budget. Thank you for your time.